So we're at Palm Sunday. Fantastic. Leading into a week, a Holy Week, some people refer to it as, Easter week, others refer to it as, but the build up to our brilliant celebration, or the amazing celebration of what Jesus has done for us, what God did in providing Jesus, his son, it's amazing. So I'm sort of coming out of the series. The series finished yesterday, so I'm kind of getting used to the technology here because I'm not sure what that screen does and what it shows me. So if I'm looking a bit confused, that's why. But I'll get comfortable in a minute. No, that's fine. Okay. So we finished the series looking at the chapter about the verse for the year, the chapter that encompassed that. We finished that last week. Adrian finished that, and so we're out of sequence now as we celebrate Easter. Palm Sunday, it's a well-known Sunday. We all know what's going on. Most of us know the story really well. Crowds meet Jesus coming into Jerusalem with shouts of Hosanna, God save us, and welcoming the King, and palm leaves, and cloaks as well. We don't see many crosses made out of cloaks these days, do we? I don't know if you noticed that about the story, but they put down as many cloaks as they put palm leaves. So maybe next year we could have some cloak versions of these. I don't know, possibility. But we know the story well, and I want you to ask this question. In fact, right now, I just want you to pray for yourselves. I want you to pray that God will open your ears specifically to what he wants to say to you, specifically what it is he wants to say to you. Thank you, Zach, for praying for me and for praying for us. But now just pray for yourselves that God will open your ears, that you will hear exactly what it is he wants to say. And then as we go through this sermon, I want you to constantly ask yourself this question, and this is the title of my talk this morning. Your place in the crowd. Your place in the crowd. What is your place in the crowd? There were crowds that were meeting Jesus, but in those crowds were lots of different kinds of people with lots of different backgrounds, people with lots of different perspectives, people with lots of different agendas and different feelings and fears and worries and hopes and dreams. And I want you to ask this question. What is my place in that crowd? Where am I in this crowd? So question that as we go through. We're going to read from Luke 19, 28 to 46. That's Luke 19, 28 to 46. After Jesus said this, he went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. As he approached Bethphage and Bethany at the hill called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'What are you untying it for?' Say, 'The Lord needs it.'" Those who were sent ahead and found it just as he had told them. And as they were untying the colt, its owners asked them, "Why are you untying a colt?" They replied, "The Lord needs it." They brought it to Jesus, threw their cloaks on the colt, and put Jesus on it. As he went along, people spread their cloaks on the road. When he came near the place where the road goes down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for all the miracles that they had seen. "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." "I tell you," he replied, "if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said this, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you." When Jesus entered the temple courts, he began to drive out those who were selling. "It is written," he said to them, "My house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." Amen. Your place in the crowd. We have an overview here as we consider context. The overview is that all four Gospels give an account of the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. All four of them. They differ in detail, but they all consistently mention a cult. They all consistently mention palm leaves and cloaks being laid down. They all consistently mention Hosanna, the praise of welcome to Jesus. And all but John mentions Jesus' cleansing of the temple. This is sort of one of the things that one of the sort of few instances where all Gospels basically tell the same account. There are some slight differences, there are no conflicting differences, but they all tell the same account. Let's consider some of the historical context so we get a better understanding of what's going on here. It's a period of massive shift and changes in the world order. The Roman Empire had sort of recently engulfed the whole of Israel, Judea, the split kingdom. It engulfed it and were setting up as what would eventually become known as Palestine. For now, the Jews are allowed to reside there, but only as a province of the Roman Empire. Jesus was born in the reign of the first emperor, Augustus, and when he entered Jerusalem, it was during the reign of the second emperor, Tiberius. And this was a sort of important trade route, this province of Israel, Judea, under the Roman Empire. It was an important sort of crux of trade between the East and the West. And there was a non-Jewish king to keep order. The Romans had installed a non-Jewish king, King Herod, but they installed him as the king of the Jews to keep order. And one of the things Herod did was he had expanded the temple. He'd made it over twice the size of what it had been. It was his big achievement, but he had an agenda. In expanding it, he turned it into a massive money exchange area. You had all these whims from Rome, the emperor, making sure that they got their way, that the emperor got his way, and he wanted to trade with the rest of the world. And so, Herod was positioning himself in such a way that he could be an important center where this could happen, where he could respond to the whims of the emperor as the emperor changed things like exchange rates and tariffs. That's an interesting word right now. As he was doing this, Herod wanted to make sure that he was in a good position so that he could retain his power. And so the temple had become something other than what it had been before. It was a place of trade in the expansion that Herod had produced. Taxes and other restrictions meant that life for ordinary people were hard. They were being taxed by the Romans, they were being taxed by Herod, they were being taxed by the leaders of the temple and of the Jewish religious leaders. They were being taxed left, right, and center. It was hard. And there were tensions all over the place, power tensions. Herod, Caesar, religious leaders, a lot boiling under the surface. So this is the historical context. Then we have a spiritual context. You see, a small detail that is really significant is that Jesus entered Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, the Mount of Olives from the east of the city through the east gate. Now this is really significant because this is where the Spirit of the Lord left the first temple when the Israelites had been so sinful that God could no longer dwell. And the book of Ezekiel gives an account of this. Ezekiel saw in a vision that God's Spirit was taken up from the holiest of holies, hovered over to the east gate, stayed there for a while, and then hovered over to the Mount of Olives and stayed there. You can read about that in Ezekiel 10 and 11. But then in Ezekiel 43, he's given another vision that God promised to return to the temple. He would come down from the Mount of Olives through the east gate and come and dwell among his people. And this is the prophecy in Ezekiel of the coming Messiah, that's what would happen. So when Jesus comes down from the Mount of Olives through the east gate, he is the fulfillment of Ezekiel. This is the Spirit of God returning to Jerusalem. This isn't random. You see, when Jesus comes down, we says that he weeps for Jerusalem because the promise was that as Israel got their house together and started obeying God, that he would be able to return. And Jesus returns because God is fed up waiting for them to do that. And so he returns anyway as the Messiah in Jesus to redeem the whole world of sins. But Jesus has this bigger picture, and he comes down, he looks at Jerusalem, and he weeps. He weeps because he knows that Jerusalem was meant for something better than what they were allowing it to be. He's weeping. It's not random. You see, what happens next, all the accounts that mention the temple cleansing, it happens sort of immediately. The next thing that happens is Jesus comes through and he goes to the temple and he cleanses it. This is the kind of next big event that's mentioned. It's not mentioned in John, but it's mentioned in the other three. And so you see this picture. Jesus is the fulfillment of Ezekiel's prophecy that the Spirit of the Lord will return from the Mount of Olives, where he had been dwelling, through the east gate, into the temple, and Jesus finds the temple completely changed. It is no longer a house of prayer. It is a place of trade set up by Herod and allowed by the religious leaders, all for fear of doing the whim of the emperor. This is no longer what God needed it to be. So his anger and his tears, they're one and the same thing. You see, Jesus just didn't sort of randomly erupt and start throwing people out of the temple, as you might think if you just sort of read it separately. You know, there's this big history of the work of God and Jesus being sent for a specific purpose. And just as with Lazarus, when he wept, it says this, Jesus was moved with anger and he wept. He was moved with anger because of the sin that caused the separation of death, and he wept at that. And here he is weeping over the sin that had caused Jerusalem to be as it was, and he was angered by the sin that had invaded the place. This is no random thing. This is all part of a much bigger picture. Sorry, I'm taking far too long here, but it's, read Ezekiel, we realize this is much more significant than we see on the surface. And then there is the prophetic context here, in Zechariah, not Zechariah. I made up a new book just for you. In Zechariah 9:9, it says this: "Rejoice greatly, daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." Three prophetic things going on here. One is that the king will come righteous and victorious. Jeremiah first revealed that a new name for God would be Tsedkenu, which means righteous. And this is the name that Jeremiah prophesied would be given to the Messiah as he comes. And so here is Jesus coming with this name, righteous and victorious. That's number one. Number two, that he would come lowly. This is this upside down kingdom thing that we've been talking about again. You don't expect a king to arrive on a donkey, let alone a colt. You don't expect that. A king comes in a chariot or on a mighty steed. This is upside down, lowly and riding on a donkey. And then a colt, a foal of a donkey. Did you pick up that little detail? A colt that has not yet been ridden. Now, I don't know if there are any horse riders here, but, a donkey is quite a small affair, but donkeys, like horses, if they've never been ridden before and you get on them and try to ride them, it's not going to happen. You're going to be off. You're going to have your face in the dirt. You'll probably be hurt quite considerably. And yet here is a picture, just as Jesus was able to calm the storm. Jesus, in getting on the colt, lowly and riding on a colt, he was able to sit on the colt and it did not buck him off. Three really significant things here in this prophetic context. Now, John's account tells us that the disciples didn't put all of this together. They didn't realize all of these fulfillments until later. When they sort of reflected and the bigger picture was clear, then it became clear, oh yeah, Jesus is the Spirit of the Lord returning from the Mount of Olives through the East Gate. And yeah, he's coming on a cult in fulfillment of Zechariah 9:9. This all became clear after the event, but the disciples and other people around probably didn't pick all of this detail up. Very few of them would have picked the detail up. It was put together later when we saw how it all came together. Just want to reflect a little bit about what Jesus is doing at this point. What's going on with Jesus? Because if you know your Gospels, you know that Jesus, up until this point, had been kind of operating a bit under the radar. Several times he would go around places in a different route so that he wouldn't bump into the people that were trying to kill him, plot to sort of get rid of him. He would tell people who'd been healed, keep it to yourself, because there was a very specific need for things not to happen in a certain time. So what is Jesus doing? Why is Jesus suddenly now deciding it is time to make myself public, go down and allow myself to be in harm's way? His disciples, in an earlier instance, when they went off to Lazarus, were saying, oh, well, we might as well go and die with him, because they realized he was moving. The closer he got to Jerusalem, the more danger he was in. Why did Jesus do it now? Well, Jesus only ever did the will of his Father. Just listen to this. He considered the will of his Father so important it was more important to him than food. My food, says Jesus in John 4:34, is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. John 5:30, by myself I can do nothing. I judge only as I hear, and my judgment is just, for I seek not to please myself, but him who sent me. And then in John 6:35, he identifies the will of the Father to be his sole purpose on earth. For I have come down from heaven, Jesus says, not to do my will, but to do the will of him who sent me. So what Jesus is doing here is he's fulfilling the will of the Father. He is hearing from the Father and putting into action what the Father wants, when the Father wants, in the way the Father wants. That's how it all comes together as making sense when we look back on it. And that is why at one point Jesus is staying under the radar, and at this point he's saying, now's the time. Jesus knew what was happening. Jesus knew what was happening. It wasn't until the night that he was betrayed that he started to really demonstrate the tension involved through the physical sort of weakness of his body, with sweats of drops of blood being sweat out of his pores. This has been me knowing what was coming up the week before. I would have been a mess at this point. And yet Jesus is just doing the will of his Father. And he calls us to do the will of the Father too. Matthew 7:21, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Mark 3:35, whoever does God's will is my brother, sister, and mother. Jesus was doing the will of the Father. He calls us to do the will of the Father also. I'm about halfway through, just to sort of gauge things. And I want us to consider now the crowd. And this is where I want you to be questioning, where do I fit in to this crowd? What part of the crowd am I? You see, we'll see various different accounts of things that are going on. We have to look a little bit further and a little bit before and stuff like that to get the full picture. But basically, we can categorize the crowd into sort of four main categories. One is the easily led. And this was probably most of them. Most of them were incredibly easily led. You see, the Gospels talk about crowds that went ahead of Jesus and crowds that followed after Jesus. And then there were crowds that came when they heard the commotion in Jerusalem. Jesus' fame had been spreading over the last couple of years. Just a few weeks before this, Lazarus had been raised from the dead for a very specific purpose, and word was spreading. People knew about this miracle. It was really close to Jerusalem. It was close to home. There was a commotion. When he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred. Molly and I, last Christmas, we went to don't look too worried. Molly and I, what? We went to the Spring Harvest Carol service. And on our way there, we noticed there was this bit of commotion going on. There seemed to be lots of crowds. And Molly said to me, "Oh, do you think they're all going to the carol service too?" I said, "No, it's a few blocks away. And I don't think the Spring Harvest Carol service is going to be this popular, but you never know." And there seemed to be lots of crowds gathering around Westminster Central Hall. And we thought, oh, there must be some big event going on. And there were TV crews, and there was one of those sort of boards that celebrities stand against and be advertising some kind of product whilst they have their photo taken. Anyway, curiosity took the better of us, and we sort of sidled up to the line. And I think Molly even asked, "What's going on here? What are you all waiting for?" I said, "Oh, we're waiting for Katy Perry." Apparently, Katy Perry was doing some kind of Christmas do at Westminster Central Hall that was going to be televised. So there you go. It was a commotion. We weren't the only ones that were sort of going up to the crowd and saying, what's going on here? Tell us what's going on here. And had we been vaguely interested in Katy Perry, well, maybe Molly was, I don't know, we might have thought, let's hang around a bit. We'll be late for the carol service. But we were single-minded. We went to the carol service, which was great, by the way. Fantastic carol service. Once I was in London, and there was this massive commotion, and I kind of knew something was going on. I kind of knew what it was. There wasn't just a commotion. There was also this really, really loud noise of engines near Trafalgar Square and near that kind of part of London. And as I tried to get nearer, the crowds were getting thick and thick and thick, and the closest I got to this commotion was literally 12 rows of people. And then I saw David Coulthard. It was a Formula One exhibition in the centre of London. I couldn't get anywhere near it. But these crowds had drawn me to see what's going on here. And I saw in the flesh, my first time I've ever seen a Formula One star in the flesh. He's very small, yeah. It's got a more jawbone than anything else, really. But, this kind of commotion, when a crowd is gathering around something, it draws attention. It brings people. When we were young people once, we would go to London and we would, stupid as we were, we'd sometimes start doing this and just pointing to something up. And it would take about a minute before other people around, unconnected to us, would be looking up as well to see what we were looking at. It's what you do when you're young and you're in London. You try to do silly things. But people are attracted by commotions or attracted by a buzz of stuff that's going on. And they welcomed as well, because everyone else was, but they didn't really understand who they were welcoming. They didn't really understand. We know that because when people asked who it was, they said, "This is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee." But Jesus wasn't a prophet. This is the big mistake today about Jesus, where people try to pass Jesus off as a good teacher and try to sort of pigeonhole our faith as just being the words of a good, wise teacher, a prophet. This is the big mistake. Jesus was not a prophet. Jesus was and is the Son of God, the Messiah. So they did not understand who they were welcoming. Most of the people didn't understand. But people wanted a better life. They wanted they wanted some of the rumors they'd been hearing about healings and being raised from the dead. They wanted some of this. And they wanted freedom from Roman occupation and the oppression of Herod and the rules of their religious leaders. They wanted freedom from this. And they were caught up in a wave where they thought, maybe this is the one. People have been saying it. I'm not sure, but maybe this is the one. And they were caught up in the wave and they are welcoming. But they quickly turned. Because so many people that were caught up in that wave were also caught up in a wave less than a week later when they demanded that Barabbas be freed instead of Jesus. And Barabbas, who was known as Jesus Barabbas, by the way, Barabbas was his surname. His first name was Jesus. And he was someone who was in prison because he had actively tried through violence to overthrow Roman authority. And so the crowd who were thinking, wow, I want some of this, maybe Jesus is the one that can free us, less than a week later, they're calling out to Barabbas as the one who can free them. They were easily led. They were easily led. Another category of people we see are people pleasers. In John 11, it says this, after this event, it says, "Yet at the same time, many, even among the leaders, believed in him. But because of the Pharisees, they would not openly acknowledge their faith for fear that they would be put out of the synagogue. For they loved human praise more than praise from God." See, the religious leaders had declared that anyone claiming that Jesus was the Christ should be put out of the synagogue. That's just a weird phrase to us today, but it was a big thing, being put out of the synagogue. In John 9:22, we see the parents of a blind man who was healed when asked, who did this? They know, they know it was Jesus, but they say, well, he's an adult, come and ask him. And it says very specifically, they were fearful that they would be put out of the synagogue if they had said, oh, Jesus did this. People were fearful about being put out of the synagogue. You had to be in good standing with the synagogue to be able to interact normally with fellow Jews, to carry out your business without disruption, to maintain a good reputation. Any questioning or heretical beliefs, you would have been banned from the synagogue, either put out for a period of time or even longer, even permanently. And this group in the crowd, there were people in this group, in the crowd that day, that were convinced that Jesus was the Christ. It added up. They perhaps knew more about the prophecies. They understood who they were welcoming. And they think, oh my goodness. And yet there's a tension because peer pressure and the desire to maintain their place in society and their reputation kept them silent. They are more concerned with the approval of men than of God. Their belief in Jesus failed in the face of persecution. The third group that we see in this crowd are the powerful elite. The powerful elite. Members of the Sanhedrin, the religious leaders, Pharisees, Sadducees, religious councils. They were allowed to operate, but they could only do so with the permission of Herod, who could only do so under the permission of Pontius Pilate, who could only do so under the authority of Caesar. There's this hierarchy of command, and everyone was looking to the one above to make sure that they could carry on operating. And so the religious leaders were in this bubble of power, but it was the lowest bubble of power, and they were dependent on their authority from above, but they weren't looking to God, they were looking to others. They were powerful, but only as far as the Romans would allow them. And so they were very threatened by anyone who might threaten their own standing. Anybody who might get Rome to start thinking, perhaps these Jewish leaders can't be left alone to control themselves. Perhaps we need to start being more more dictatorial in how we run things. Maybe we need to strip them of their power. To remain in power, they needed to deliver compliance to Rome. And any kind of insurrection would have had the opposite of compliance, and they'd have ended up getting shut down. Ultimately, the religious leaders of the day were deceived by wealth and other concerns of the world, such as position and recognition. And so whilst in a position of hypocritically just benefiting from the trappings of power, they were just trying to cling on to it. They were not producing any spiritual fruit of any significance. They were more interested in power than anything else. And then the final group of people that we see in this crowd are believers. They're in the minority. They're imperfect. But there were those who understood who they were welcoming, believed in him, and to a certain extent were not afraid to say so. How many? Well, we know there were the 12. We know there was a larger group. We know there were 120 that were left in Jerusalem waiting for the Holy Spirit. In Corinthians 1, we get an impression that there were around 500 or so actual believers. 1 Corinthians 15:6 says this: "After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep." Referred to as brothers and sisters. So Paul is referring to a group of around 500 brothers and sisters who Jesus appeared to after his resurrection. So we know that there's around 500 people who are in this minority. And yet they all appeared to desert him when he was arrested. Only Peter staying close by, but ultimately denying him. Some ventured out again during the crucifixion when, they could do so under the cloak of all the commotion. But many remained in hiding through fear. These same people, emboldened by the Holy Spirit, a few weeks later, no longer have that fear, and many would go on to become martyrs. Many would live their lives under persecution because, emboldened by the Holy Spirit, they would no longer be in hiding, would no longer be afraid to the same extent. So there are four groups of categories within the crowd. And there's an interesting parallel here, because when you look at these four categories, there's a parallel here between the parable that Jesus gave about the sower. If you look at this slide here, the hard ground where the seed fell represents the easily led, no root, none at all, very quickly shifted to something else. The stony ground represents where there's no root, so they quickly fall away when persecution comes. Those who believe, but not enough to get past the persecution they would endure if they were to claim it. And then the thorny ground is those that were so deceived by wealth and power that actually they'd stand in some opposition. The evil one would snatch the seed away from them. And the good soil represents those who understood, accepted, and eventually bear fruit by believing. Interesting parallel there between the sower and these three categories of crowd. So we're nearly at the end here. And I just want to challenge you. I want to challenge me. I'm very challenged by this. Where do you stand in the crowd? Where do you stand in the crowd? Are you easily led? Are you caught up in the moment of church worship, but during the week you fall easily back into the patterns of the world? Do you blow hot and cold in relation to Jesus as circumstances change? Sometimes, you're up for following him. Other times, you're not. Are you still in two minds about whether Jesus is even the Messiah? I don't think there's many people here that might have that, but there may be some. Do you live as if you're in two minds, even if you're not? Do you live as if you are? What do your work colleagues know about your faith or your local community if you're not working? What do your outside of church friends know about what you believe? Are you easily led? Are you a people pleaser? Are you firm in your belief, but you're reluctant to share it? You say, it's fine, I absolutely believe this. Everything you say, Mike, I totally believe this. But I am worried about what people think if they knew. What would they say if they knew what I believed when I'm, for my world outside of church? Are you concerned that you might be ostracized, that your reputation would take a dive, that you might be excluded? Are you a powerful elite? I don't think it's very likely there's many powerful elites here. In that what the powerful elites did is they were pretty much, obstructing God. In fact, Caiaphas prophesied that it would be fine for Jesus to die, and decided that he would be part of that process. And all the other leaders had come to the conclusion, better for one person to die and for our power to remain as it is. So I don't think there's anybody here that is opposing God in that way. However, are there parts of our lives where we are clinging on to power and wealth at the expense of following Jesus? Or are you a believer in the sense that we see here, someone who totally accepts Jesus, will not be swayed, will not hide what they believe, will not worry about their reputation? You may still relate to the fear that caused these first believers to hide, to run away. Jesus knows our weaknesses. Failing, being fearful, running away, these are not salvation issues. These are issues that the Father understands, that Jesus understands, and he reinstates us as we keep looking to him. Are you a believer? Or are you a mix of all of these in some way? Are you a mix? I think I'm a mix, if I'm honest. Because, I see myself as a believer. I see myself as a believer in the crowd. And yet I can see some hints of where wealth and power and recognition sometimes tempt me. Sometimes are more important in my life than they should be. I'm sometimes aware that perhaps I'm too keen to please others, so that I'll say, oh yeah, rather than say, no, I don't agree with that. And I can see that I can be easily led, that I'll be so easily sort of drawn into social media, things that are not good for me. So maybe you're a mix of these things. As we finish, as the band come up, please. This Easter, we have an opportunity to evaluate where we stand in the crowd. This Easter, we have an opportunity to reposition where we stand in the crowd. This Easter, we have an opportunity to stand against the crowd, to swim against the tide, to go against the grain. So I'm just going to pray, and as I pray, the music's going to start, and we're going to be led in some worship. As we do that, I just want you to use this as a moment to respond. And the response is simply just going to be an opportunity for you to respond to God, just you and God. So open your minds, open your hearts, open your ears now to just further hear the promptings of the Spirit. Where do you stand in the crowd?